Good afternoon. Welcome to the Vancouver Asian Film Festival Diversity in Filmmaking virtual panel series. We are the second of a whole series that's airing the whole of May, and my name is Lynn Lee. I'm the festival director of VAF, and I'm here to welcome you and thank you all for joining us and to kick things off. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that the land we're gathered on and live streaming from is from the Coast Salish nations of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And this week, I'd also like to acknowledge that we are on the land of other nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat nations, amongst others. I'm sorry for people for messing the pronunciation up from people from Toronto, but it's a sentiment that counts. Everybody is in week 8 of the COVID lockdown, and I hope you're all coping well. We usually host our Diversity in Filmmaking series in the month of June, but because we really want everyone to be able to connect with the community and hopefully get inspired, we decided to do a full month series focusing on different topics every Saturday. So you can find us today and next week and the following, and follow us on VAF Vancouver to find out more information. And this month is also the Asian Heritage Month, that we want to celebrate our heritage, but for Asians, we're also facing a very tough period because of the rising anti-Asian violence and acts that we're all facing. And for that reason, VAF has launched an Eliminate Hate campaign, which you can find information on at eliminatehate.org.com. eliminatehate.org. And this is a multimedia campaign to document and transform racist attacks against Asian Canadians into positive public service announcements by all of you. Our call to action for our community is to stand up and speak out against this violence and to support all the other organizations making actionable change. Our Eliminate Hate campaign wants you to make and share videos to help the community to come together and help victims know that they're not alone, and to promote positive solutions to eliminate the negativity of racism. So please join our movement and join us at eliminatehate.org, as you can see here. And we're also very excited that we're getting more support from the community. And we're working with the government of BC's Resilience BC Anti-Racism Network to produce 6 anti-racism videos for BC Hate Crimes website. And we are looking for filmmakers that can produce 90-second PSA videos in Mandarin, Cantonese, Korean, Japanese, Tagalog, and Vietnamese. So please check on vaf.org and eliminatehate.org for more information in the next week or two. We also want to encourage and inspire filmmakers to get out there and make your own films. And that's why every year we have a MAM festival, which is our Mighty Asian Movie Making Marathon. And this year we are going to kick things off in June. So stay tuned and check out MAM 15, because we're celebrating our 15th year. And we're very, very grateful for a lot of supporters, because without our sponsors and our community supporters, we won't be able to bring this program to you. Our panel series is sponsored by the British Columbia Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture, the Multiculturalism Branch, and Tell a Story Hive. It's also co-presented by our community organizations, Exploration, Vancouver Asian Heritage Month Society, Vancouver Short Film Festival, Women in Film and TV Vancouver, Crazy 8's Celluloid Social Club, Hapapalooza, Pacific Canada Heritage Center Museum of Migration, or PCHCMOM, Rain Dance Vancouver. And you can watch this recorded panel on our website, on our Facebook page and YouTube, and also on Tell a Story Hive in a future date. We would also like to let you know that because this year a lot of events have been canceled, we are in need of more support and more financial support from the community. So please help us and donate if you can, and come on VAF.org to make your donations if you like our programming and if you support VAF. Also, please connect with us at VAF Vancouver on a social media, #VAF and DIF 2020 if you enjoy our program. But enough talking from me. I'm very, very excited to introduce to you our panel of today on practical filmmaking. And we have a lovely, talented moderator, Arnold Lim, who is a two-time Telefilm's Talent to Watch recipient. And you will know about his film All in Madonna and his web series Best Friend Me. I'd also like to thank our special guests whom Arnold will introduce today, including Albert Shin, Jennifer Liao, and Gorrman Lee. So before I pass the mic to Arnold, I'd like to thank our entire team, producing team, including Regina Liao, our creative producers, Mayumi Yoshida, Natch Dasadu Metha, who is helping us in the background doing all the lovely tech today, our newly joined creative producer, Joshua Lam, and Arnold, who is also one of our producers for the year. All right, over to you, Arnold.
All right, thank you so much, Lynn. So appreciated. I'm so pumped to be here. All three of our panelists are amazing, amazing filmmakers and have some amazing work behind them and working on some great projects. So I'll introduce you, and what the three panelists will get today from me is to sit awkwardly by while I gush about you for a little bit. So first of all, I'd like to talk about Albert Shin. So just to tell you a little bit about Albert, his last two feature films both premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival. His feature In Her Place received 7 Canadian Screen Award nominations, including Best Picture, Director, and Original Screenplay. And his latest, A Mystery Set in Niagara Falls, was released a few months back by IFC Midnight and Elevation Pictures. His second feature was produced at about 150,000, his third went into the millions. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about that, how he got some of his funding, and about some of his amazing projects, both of which are amazing barn burners, by the way. Thank you, Albert, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, so number two, equally amazing. I met her at the Features First Lab many moons ago in Toronto. One of the great things about that program, shout out to the NSI, was the opportunity to meet awesome, like-minded filmmakers. So Jennifer Liao, actor, writer, director, producer, pretty much everything. She's in post-production on her second directed feature called Grandma Dearest. She directed Omni TV crime drama Blood and Water, a couple episodes, and that series was nominated for Best Drama Series at this year's Canadian Screen Awards. Most recently, she made the move from Canada to LA, at least part-time, and hopefully we'll ask her a little bit about that. And yeah, so thank you, Jennifer, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, we have Gorrman Lee. He's a talented screenwriter, and his work, he's worked in the story rooms of Netflix's Altered Carbon, Another Life, Showcases Continuum, and the History Channel's Yukon Gold. You can see some of his writing on the latest seasons of Netflix's The Order and Sci-Fi's Van Helsing. Thank you so much, Gorrman.
Thanks for that great introduction.
Yes. Thank you. And I'm so excited to be here today. You know, getting the opportunity to speak to like-minded individuals, especially in the climate like it is today, is not easy to come by. But to get three people like yourselves is super awesome. So let's talk a little bit about your origin story. So I wanted to talk about where you came from. Like, you know, tell me a little bit about your background, the Coles notes of your journey. When did the radioactive, film spider, when did that bite you, Gorrman? Maybe you can start off.
Yeah, sure. So I went through the SFU BFA filmmaking program and graduated in 2007. And, graduated wanting to be a writer-director, but was a little bit aimless for a while, just wasn't entirely sure how to kickstart that aspect of my career. And that's when I discovered the, unfortunately now defunct, Praxis Center for Screenwriters program. And I took a few classes through that program and was lucky enough to have my tuition paid for through, it was a diversity initiative. And going through these programs, I got to workshop a feature film script, Gold Delicious, with Mina Shum and Guinevere Turner. That I think that lit a fire under my butt. And eventually I went to do my master's at UBC in creative writing. And I think, the combined experience and skills of all these things sort of allowed me to start putting myself forward as, sort of a story editor in the TV space. Again, Praxis was amazing in that they had an internship which put me in the writer's room of Continuum, showcases Continuum, for 2 weeks. And, just sort of worked my butt off there, and I think made some good impressions. And some of the creators of that program brought me along for the ride into Van Helsing, which has,
Awesome.
Then spurred some other jobs on Altered Carbon and Another Life and The Order. I guess that's sort of the short version of my origin story.
Yeah, well, that's great. The funny thing is, I was on your IMDb the other day, and I was looking through it, and it took me almost like 20 minutes to scroll to the bottom. It's pretty impressive. Pretty
Thank
impressive.
you. Thanks.
Yeah, so Jennifer, tell me a little bit about how you got started.
Sure. I mean, I grew up really, really wanting to write sitcoms, really. That was kind of the big thing that spurred my interest in television when I was younger. And eventually, after I finished university, where I did not study film, I did study drama. I did minor in drama in university, but I took the practical path to avoid some fights, essentially. But I started pursuing acting because I really missed it. It was something I did growing up. It was actually, I was doing speech arts and drama growing up, and I really loved it. And I actually don't really act anymore. The only acting I really pursue anymore is more voice oriented. It's not so much. It's been a while since I've really been pursuing on-screen acting, and truth be told, I wasn't great at it, and that's also something you learn at trying it, which I don't regret, because I did learn a lot, and I feel like it's just part of the toolkit that I have now as a filmmaker. But I did start as an actor and pursuing acting, and then very quickly, actually, I started volunteering on other people's short films, just as a crew member, just helping out. Often I would be like a production coordinator or something, just helping these really small productions kind of keep everything in line. And then eventually I decided I just wanted to write and direct my own short film, write, direct, produce, all those good things. I actually did star in that one. That was kind of a mistake, but I did make a short film to start, and it was it was like the lightning bolt. I really realized that was where I was meant to be. That's what I was meant to be doing. So that's essentially the origin story part of it. The rest of it gets a little hairy, but we can talk more about that as we go on.
Yeah, well, the hairy stuff is what we want to talk about. So Albert, Shin, can you tell us about your hairy story?
Well, I guess my origin story is that it actually starts really early. My parents owned a restaurant, and beside the restaurant there was a video store.
Me too.
Yeah, there you go. But the quirky thing is that the video store beside my parents' restaurant didn't have a bathroom, so they had to use the restaurant bathroom. And in exchange, they gave us movies, I think, for half price or for $1 or something, a deeply discounted rate. And my parents, loving any sort of deal, they really encouraged me to take advantage of that. So I started renting movies, and this was when I was really young, and I started just really kind of getting into it, and then started watching a lot of things, that I probably shouldn't have been watching at that time, at that age. And then, everybody there knew me as the kid from the restaurant. So yeah, it started really early, and then I just kind of got obsessed with it. And I, never played video games growing up. I just was one of those like weird, strange, nerdy film guys. And yeah, I went to film school, just never gave myself a safety net to do anything else, and told my parents this is what I was going to do. And I think at that point, it's not like I came up to them when I was, 17 or something saying, I want to be a filmmaker. I think by that point, it was pretty inevitable in their eyes, because that's all I did and all I thought about and talked about all the time. So yeah, so from there I went to film school, met a lot of friends, and tried to make a lot of movies, a all of them very unsuccessfully. And then once I graduated, I think I came up right around that time when, kind of the DIY film movement was just sort of in its infancy, where the cameras were just kind of getting to a point where maybe you could take one of these small cameras and grab a couple of friends and make these mumblecore features or whatever you want to call it. And then from that, just kept building and, built a little production company with a filmmaking friend of mine who I went to school with, and then started producing his films, and he started producing my films, and just, it was a step-by-step kind of progression, and, still on that path.
Awesome. So for people out there, if any filmmakers or film lovers out there have any burning questions for these three awesome filmmakers, get your questions ready. We have people watching for your questions and comments so we can answer them live. Also, please feel free to share this on social media so all film lovers can get a chance to hear what some of these awesome panelists have to say. All right, so I guess the obvious question in there, let's just get this out of the way right off the start. We're living in COVID-19. It's a crazy world out there, obviously. Let me ask Gorrman just to start things off. People talk about writing as being maybe one or two things involved in filmmaking that hasn't been affected quite as much. Is that the case? What has been life been like for you as a writer?
I would say that assessment is accurate. Yeah, like writing and post has not been as deeply affected. I'm very fortunate that before the isolation lockdown happened, I was a few weeks into a new development room for a show that I unfortunately can't say too much about at this point. But
we'll get it out of you by the time
you can try. So yeah, we were a few weeks into that when this happened, and I guess we took a couple days to sort of pause and figure things out. But yeah, we've been actively going, writing, rewriting, noting each other's scripts on Zoom. We are still checking in every day and delivering. Yeah, I'm very fortunate and privileged to be in this position. I know that it's very hard for others who have sort of working in other roles in the industry and having entire shows just shut down. But from what I hear, we might be getting a little bit closer to getting going again. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed for me too. Fingers crossed for everyone, all the filmmakers out there. It's such a huge part. I live in the West, and in Vancouver is a service town, and I feel for all the people in the Vancouver service industry. A lot of them are hurting right now. So
yeah,
shout out to them. So Jennifer, I want to talk a little bit about you. So touching on post-production, Gorrman mentioned post-production, and you're in post, as I understand it, on Grandma Dearest, your latest feature.
Yeah. As I directed this feature, Grandma Dearest, which shot just at the tail end of last year. And we actually probably, scheduling wise, we just are a little bit late. So I think we, honestly, we're probably about a week away from the movie being finished, but because of the lockdown orders, it just came down that way. We did kind of do a lot of sound stuff remotely. Remotely is not the right word. Instead of being in a mix studio, we were looking at cuts essentially and listening to them at home, that kind of thing, doing notes over email instead of, being in the room. But the one major aspect of the work that we haven't been able to complete is more around color and online and stuff like that, which, I do know that there's a certain amount of color that could be done at home with certain projects with certain people's setups, but the proper post studios, full featured ones, for the most part, I don't think can necessarily do that. I do know Technicolor apparently launched a kind of remote coloring thing for their clients that was always in the works, and they kind of pushed it up a little bit, as I understand it. I don't know, this is all hearsay, but if you don't have like a properly calibrated monitor at home and stuff like that, that's something that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do remotely unless you have more resources. So that's sort of where that landed. But certainly we're the actual shooting was done, the ADR was done, in good time. So that ultimately we're pretty lucky in terms of the scheduling delay.
That's so interesting. Like I'm in post actually on a feature right now as well, and it's so tricky because the audio, when typically you'll be able to listen to it in a place that's set up for audio, and now I'm listening to it on my computer. Did you find it difficult at all to listen, with the equipment that you have, and now you're going to be going into coloring with the equipment that you have as opposed to going to post studio like you had talked about before?
We're definitely not doing color until they're back. Like that's something that will have to be done in person. That's, I think, something we can't really get around. Sound wise is interesting because I do have headphones that are used for professional sound. So this is better than listening to, say, your earbuds, and it has a more accurate, there's more accuracy to the perception of it. I would love if maybe when because we will also have to online it in person, I would love to be able to just sit and watch it all the way through and make sure that the sound is, because the levels I think are the hardest thing to gauge. I mean, it's one thing if I'm just like, oh, can you add a sound effect here? Can you take this away or whatever? But you're right that it's hard to gauge levels. It is hard to gauge levels, but at the same time, the film is also intended for broadcast. It's for the broadcast market. So there's almost even a slightly different parameter in terms of like what you want to hear and what you're looking for, because people are going to be watching it on their own screens. Like that's really the main target for it. So I don't know if that really plays into it, because certainly I'm not watching it with like trying to focus on one lane or the other, but that's definitely something that I mean, I don't know if you've maybe heard this, musicians sometimes say like, once you've mixed your song, don't listen to it in the beautiful studio with like, all your bells and whistles. Like listen to it on your crappy car radio. Sorry, your crappy car radio, so that you know how it sounds. Just like when somebody's just listening to it on the freeway or whatever. Like I think that's a fair thing to observe. But yeah, it's certainly not ideal. It wasn't the way we wanted to handle it. And I do hope we'll be able to get a little bit of time in once we're back. But this was a way of being able to actually work on it and make some forward progress while we're in this time.
Well, I like the fact that you told us that not to listen to it in the beautiful home studio as a micro budget indie filmmaker. I don't even have one of those, so I'm glad to hear that.
I will say though, you should listen to it when you're actually working on it in the proper studio, if at all possible. Because I do have a friend who told me that they watched went to their like festival premiere of their film, their really scrappy low budget film where they did the sound at home, and they heard a toilet flush in the background that was not there before. So you really need really good headphones or really good space, at least to listen to it at full in its full glory, because that's also stuff that, especially if you're going to be showing it in a theater at all, I mean, that's really an important thing.
That's such a funny story after the fact, but I can imagine being in the theater and hearing that toilet flush when there's not a toilet on screen. I would be horrified.
Yeah, I do not think they were happy about that, but it's a lesson. I'm sure they were able to go back and fix it after that.
Take the toilet out in post. All right. So, Albert, can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now? So you're coming out of Clifton Hill. Can you tell us a little bit about that project and where you are with the disappearance at Clifton Hill?
Yeah. So, I mean, luckily, I guess for Clifton Hill, we were sort of one of the very last films to be released theatrically in the U.S. and Canada before sort of the shutdown orders kind of hit, both Canada and the U.S. So we played, we had a release in Canada and it was interesting because, obviously the COVID thing was bubbling under the surface the entire time. But yeah, it was great. I think, I'm one of those people that's, once the movie's done, it's like hard for me to sort of talk about it in any sort of way that's articulate, maybe in terms of how I feel about the result of the film. Mm-hmm. I'm very good about talking about making movies. I think I like the doing, not really the talking about. But so we did that, and then I actually just heard from IFC that especially on the West Coast in the U.S., I guess a lot of or a few drive-in theaters have been opening up or have still been operational, and they've been playing the movie
Awesome.
at drive-in theaters, which was kind of cool. When I heard that, I was like, oh, it's kind of neat. So that's sort of in the works, and it just got released on VOD and everything. So it's one of those things where it's like it's sort of out of my hands at this point. So I don't know. Hopefully, people watch it and enjoy it, or get something out of it. Hopefully, but yeah. So for me, it's I'm sort of both in Gorrman and Jennifer's world, which is I'm writing. I'm in the midst of writing something right now, and also in post-production on a film that I produced, and same thing with as Jennifer was saying, which is just try to do as much stuff as we can remotely, knowing that there's some things that we just can't do remotely, but just pushing that boulder up the hill while we can, and while with people working from home, kind of thing. Yeah, so not ideal, but definitely under the circumstances, it's better than some of the friends that I had that were in production and they just had to shut down.
Yeah, tough times for a lot of filmmakers out there. Now, to go back to your story, I want to talk a little bit about the first time we met. So we met at the Whistler Film Festival, where I saw and met you for the first time, and you screened In Her Place. That was in 2014. We had a film at the festival, and I just happened to see, oh, there's like a Korean film, Canadian film. Okay, I'm going to go check this out. I walked out of that theater. I walked into the theater having no idea what to expect. And walked out of that theater thinking I'd seen one of the best films I'd seen that year. It was so good. And you made that film for approximately $150,000, you were saying. And then you went on to move to Clifton, which was in the several $1 million range. Can I ask you a little bit about how you fundraised for, first of all, In Her Place, and how you transitioned from going and working on a film that was $150,000 to the couple $1 million range, which you just finished completing?
Yeah, so both projects, obviously sort of different arenas in terms of budget and scale, but kind of both took several years to get off the ground. In Her Place was one where I had made a feature film, which was like a no, like not even a low budget, but a no budget feature. I think I made it for $10,000 or something like that, and kind of didn't really do anything. And it was kind of an interesting failure, if I want to be kind of generous to the film. But it's
that's my life. Good.
And the movie. And I had this idea for In Her Place, which is a film that I wanted to shoot in Korea. It's, I was born and raised in Canada, but spent a lot of time in Korea, spent every summer there, and just thought it was sort of a side of myself that I'd never explored making movies. I was always making movies in Toronto and in the English language. And, I thought that was like, I was sort of just kind of shutting the door on kind of like half of myself almost. So was developing this project for years and, had no money. And so it was, when we started making the film, when thinking about making the film, this was sort of pre the Kickstarter age. I don't think Kickstarter or Indiegogo or any of those kinds of platforms even existed. So I was sort of fundraising slowly but surely. And in the time that we were developing and writing the film, which was, 3 or 4 years, my partner had made another film through our company, which had actually done okay. So we got a little bit of money from that, and then some Arts Council funding, and we were able to cobble up about $100,000. And then I just went to Korea.
Was that private funding that you said you got from?
So we sold the film, like our first sort of feature, which my partner Igor had directed. We sold that. We got a little bit of money, and then we had this company, and we were really just taking whatever money we took or earned. We were just kind of using it to make our next film. We were really young, and just kind of everything was just whatever we could do kind of thing. And so we made a little bit of money off of that. We had some Arts Council funding, and then I had raised about maybe $25,000. I think sort of something like that. So I can't remember the exact math of it, but we cobbled up about $100,000. And then I went to Korea, and then I shot this movie. I stayed there for about almost a year, and found actors and all the things that you do as a filmmaker, completely under the radar. Nobody knew I was doing it. So almost maybe as a defense mechanism for if it didn't work out, then I could just quietly just shelve it somewhere maybe. But and so we made it, we shot it. I brought it back to Canada, and then I had to raise about another $35,000 to $50,000 to finish it, which I, hadn't really thought about. For me, it was just about getting it in the can and then kind of figuring it out. And so, through that, once again, it was mainly private and a little bit of Arts Council stuff for some other things. Maybe I shouldn't say this publicly, but, we had another project that we had Arts Council funding for, and then maybe I appropriated a little bit of it for this project. And then, got it done for $150,000, which was, and then that film kind of gave me, it did surprisingly a lot better than, I'd ever dreamed or hoped. And it got me and the film a lot of notice, which got me on the radar of this production company in Toronto called Rhombus Media, which is, a bigger production company. And they kind of proposed this idea to me, which was, they have a big development slate through Telefilm. And they were like, we want to work with you. And do you have any ideas? And, as someone who's always has my own production company and is developing my own projects, I figured if I'm going to work with these guys, then I might as well think of something that, I would never be able to produce or develop on my own. So something on a bigger canvas, and something that's kind of built to be a little bit for a broader audience, let's say, than maybe Inner Place or some of the more esoteric films that I was developing on my own. So that's sort of what happened. We developed Clifton Hill. I developed Clifton Hill with Rhombus, and 3 or 4 years later, they were able to get the funding through all sorts of, and that was sort of the more, I guess, traditional means, Telefilm and Ontario Creates in Canada and Ontario, and tax credits, and we had the CBC come in and give us some money, and just did it that way. Yeah.
Awesome. So the tip to your filmmakers out there is to be persistent and misappropriate funds. Got it. Nice. That's awesome. That's a great story. I mean, the films that you make are just art, and I love watching you work. Speaking of someone else, I love watching work. Jennifer, I want to talk a little bit about your transition. So you made an interesting transition. So you lived in Toronto, where we met, and then you went. You worked on. You had a feature there, and then you worked on 2 series, and then you moved to LA. And at least partly LA. Maybe can you tell us a little bit about that? So, moving to LA is one of those things that a lot of actors, a lot of filmmakers think about. It's a big jump, and you made that brave kind of step to do that. Can you tell us a little bit about what went through your head and how you made some of those decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm not, I don't consider myself like that. I closed the door in Canada and came to LA. Like for me, I'm Canadian. I want to keep being in the Canadian industry, and for me, it was always, as I think it is for a lot of people, it's like about expanding my opportunities and trying to give it a try and see if I can expand my opportunities and have a bigger field in terms of being able to work. Because a part of something that I really am committed to and wanting to do is working for hire. I want to direct an episodic television, and that's been a big focus of mine over the last few years. I mean, the short answer really about the why is that I don't get job interviews in Canada, and I think that part of my thought about that was like, I think there are 2 kinds of transitions to LA from Canadian filmmakers and creative people. There's the folks who are so successful here and have the kind of buzz and accolades and all those kinds of things that allow them to show up and have people super interested in them right away in America, because they do want to find new talent, and there's a lot of things happening here. And then there's the other path, which is like people like myself, I suppose, who are kind of willing to start at the bottom and kind of do the same thing and try and like pound the pavement and figure it out, and at least give myself that opportunity to give it a try. And so that's kind of the mindset that I came into it with. And I'll be honest, a lot of the shift is not that I think it's not easier. It's certainly maybe the opposite, but it gives you, there's a different mindset. In Canada, I feel like, unfortunately, and to be fair, that's a reality. It's a bit of a scarcity mindset, It's a pretty small industry. It's, challenging in all sorts of ways, but it's especially, I feel like over time, it just becomes really hard to if you're not making the kinds of inroads you want to make, it's hard to really have a good keep a good headspace about it. That was my feeling anyway, and that's a really honest and way of me saying that, is like I found it really hard to stay in that road, because I was really duking it out in the super indie super micro budgeted space, and producing all my own stuff, and really trying to get into like trying to work. And then I held down a full-time job for 10 years at the same time. Like, it literally overlapped with most of the beginning of my directing career. And getting to work on this Blood and Water, which was like an amazing opportunity. It was a big break for me. I feel like the work I did was good. I was both a writer on it and a director on it. And then I got out of that, and it was the first time in my life I thought, hey, maybe this could lead to something. Like, I worked on a series, like that was something I was working on for a long time. And then nothing happened. Like, I still haven't gotten a job interview off of doing Blood and Water. So it was, and unfortunately, the one mistake I think I actually made at the time was that I didn't immediately go back to taking a new day job, and just literally just putting my head down and continuing to work on new stuff and trying to figure that out. I did kind of go through a period of both not being employed as a filmmaker and not being employed as an office worker, which I most of my life have been. So that's kind of where, and that's I don't know if I'm getting too far outside the lines in terms of talking about that, because that's like some real big life stuff. But ultimately what happened though is, like, I did decide that I was going to put in the application. I had no expectations about it. I just did the work of putting together the papers, because it's a lot of that stuff, right? You got to like fulfill all these things and check all the right boxes and send something in, and like maybe they'll say yes and maybe they won't. And ultimately it did come through. Like, it's probably like a couple of years or something like that, and I wasn't waiting for it. And I had to make a decision, like, am I going to actually try this? Am I actually going to spend some time in a new place, and where like I know nobody, and the industry doesn't know me at all, and that kind of thing? And I just decided, like, I'll do it. I'll go for it. So that's sort of where, that was sort of the impetus of it, was like, try. I think we're all just trying to find a place where we can, it's such a hard industry, right? We're just all trying to just find a place where we can keep going. And a lot of that is internal. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of that is the psychological, it's the internal, it's the like, what can I do for myself that's practical, and, and just to feel like I'm moving forward and stuff like that. And that's been, that's the thing that I think it gave me, for sure.
And after all that perseverance, which is amazing, thank you for sharing that. You got the opportunity to go there and direct a feature. Can you tell me, how did that happen? And can you tell me a little bit about how the project got off the ground and the timing of that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it really was a situation that you hope would happen more often in your life, which is that I had heard that there was a company that was interested in producing a couple of movies for broadcast, and that they wanted to meet directors. And I believe they also wanted specifically to meet women directors. I don't think they'd had the opportunity to work with a lot before that. And so I sent I sent a letter and resume and reel and all that sort of stuff, and was one of the people that they met with and interviewed. And I really, again, had no expectations, because I don't know that I do particularly well in in-person interviews as much as at least in face-to-face interviews. I think we actually did it over a Skype call. But, so for all of my blustering about how much I want to have interviews, I don't know that they always go that well. But ultimately they just a couple weeks later, they were looking to move into production fairly quickly. So a couple weeks later, they offered me the job. And I'll be honest, I don't really know why they did. I really had I really had just like an amazing experience working with these producers and the crew that we had and the cast that we had. And honestly, it was like I would have taken the job no matter what. Like I needed the job, so don't tell them that. But I was like, yeah, absolutely. I'm absolutely game. And it's fortunate and great that it did intersect into also being a really great experience. But I think ultimately what it was is like, these are small films. And so I think they really wanted somebody who had the experience of working under tiny schedules with a tiny budget and making things look like they were shot over more time with more money. And that is something that I can say that I bring to the table. That is something I do have experience with. And I have, because I produce all my own work, I also, I know how much things cost. I'm very, very like practical sometimes to the detriment of the creative side of things, which I'm trying to work on. But I think I'm assuming that's what they responded to, is that I was definitely like ready to jump in head first and was not, put off by having, not much time and not much money to do this.
Quick question. How much can you talk about how much the budget was for that film and how much it was compared to End of Days, which you made with some telefilm funding?
I don't think I'm allowed to disclose, at least I don't know for sure if I'm allowed to disclose what Grandma Dearest costs. It is a low budget film. It's under $1 million. I can say that. Like it's a relatively low budget film. End of Days was about $250,000, and then a feature that I produced before that called Sex After Kids, that was a $75,000 budget all in. So those were those first experiences were definitely a trial by fire. But even End of Days was a step up from Sex After Kids, and they both had very different models of working. I don't know if you want me to elaborate on that. I can definitely get into it some more if you want, but I want to make sure everybody else has a chance to discuss their stuff too.
For sure. I definitely like to mine that a little bit more. But I'll talk to here Gorrman. I want to talk a little bit about the writer's room. Now, for me, I'm not a writer per se. Being a director and producer, it's kind of like, it seems like this fantasy land almost. Like I don't actually know what a writer's room is in physical form and what that actually means. So for someone who's been in the story rooms and the writer's rooms for Netflix shows like Altered Carbon and Van Helsing, can you tell us, give us a little bit of thoughts on, what are they? Like, how does it work? And what is it like to work in those places?
Great question. And before getting into it, I should clarify that with Altered Carbon, my work with them was in a more junior capacity. I was a script coordinator, so I wasn't actively in the writer's room, but I worked very closely with the writers. So I love that show, but I just needed to clarify that one point. But yeah, being in the writer's room, it's a dream job, and it's in many ways kind of like just spending weeks at a time, 9 to 5, 9 to 6, just sort of shooting the shit, just brainstorming stuff about vampires or werewolves or different spells.
That's so awesome.
It's it's a lot of brainstorming, a lot of junk food eating, and obviously a lot of hard work as well, in sort of collaboratively putting the pieces together to a larger season arc, and then getting into the more nitty-gritty mechanics of breaking down scenes and beats and character arcs, writing to, in Van Helsing's case, commercial breaks, and coming up with these great cliffhangers that keep viewers binging on Netflix and that sort of thing. And there's certainly different paths to get into a writer's room, and every writer's room works a little bit differently. Every writer's room is showrun by a different person or different team of showrunners. Having worked with a handful of them, everyone's got their sort of different approach.
Well, it just sounds so interesting. I don't having not much experience in that world, it sounds fascinating to me. Can you tell me a little bit about ego? Now, ego is one of those things, and I'm not speaking specifically to you or anyone in specifics, but in film, sometimes it's something that can be prevalent, and and everyone can be guilty of that. And I'm not meaning that in a derogatory way, but tell me, like, what is it like to have your ideas built up and torn down and beat up, and doing that to other people? Like, how does that work? Does your ego take a Royal Rumble every once in a while?
I think, that when you get started in your first couple weeks on a new show, or even when you first break into a writer's room for the first time, yeah, it's hard, and, I've definitely seen people get beaten down by it. You pitch something, you pitch an idea, and, ideally, in a perfect world in a writer's room, there should be no such thing as a bad idea. You want to create this safe space where you can pitch anything, because even if it's not the idea that lands on the board, it will hopefully spark something else, or spark a similar idea, or something that just jumps out of that one that didn't land. And as I said, I've seen people definitely take that harder, and I think I think it's sort of the responsibility, the role of the more experienced or senior writers to sort of hopefully take those juniors under the wing and sort of say, hey, it's sort of practice makes perfect. That one didn't land, but don't let that get you down. Don't let that break you. You have to keep at it, and you kind of have to develop that thick skin to just be like, oh yeah, that wasn't an attack on me or my ability to be creative. It was just that one thing didn't land, and I need to roll with it. And after lunch, keep throwing out more ideas that will either land on the board or spark someone else to come up with something better.
Were you ever at any point a little bit gun shy after having an idea or something that you pitched not work, especially at the beginning?
Sure. I started out on Van Helsing as a script coordinator, which, getting to the weeds of what that is, it's essentially kind of a writer's room assistant role combined with, a role where occasionally you can get some writing credits out of it. You can write part of an outline, or you can write a part of an episode potentially, or you can write some scenes or dialogue, sometimes uncredited. And you're also sort of responsible for, making sure the rest of production is all on the same colored pages. It's really a very important job, and one where people get to learn the ropes. And so, yeah, starting out with under that role and working in a writer's room for the first time, yeah, definitely I was experiencing a bit of gun shyness, but I very quickly learned a couple of tricks to sort of making sure that I was heard. As a junior, I would say when you're in the room, a good opportunity, a good time to throw out your ideas before anyone else has a chance to maybe, talk over you or steer the conversation away is, coming back from a bathroom break or coming back from lunch. Everyone's kind of like, well, that was a nice 5 minutes. I guess we got to get back to work now. So I found being the person in that, 10 seconds of silence as everyone's like waiting for the boss or whoever's going to pitch the first idea out, just be that person right out of the gate. So, when I was taking a pee, I was kind of thinking this one thing over, and what if we did this? Or what if, this character at the top of Act 1, what about this idea? Is there anything in this? Is there value to this? So yeah, that was a little trick I learned.
I love it. You start in your trick. What you do is you start your sentences with, I was taking a pee and...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Perfect. Got it. That was great.
Making a sandwich after I peed, and what if we try this?
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's so fun.
Actually, I would be curious to hear about the Blood and Water writing experience, if Jennifer, you would want to
yeah, I'd love to hear that. Yeah, and please, like, if panelists have questions for each other, please feel free.
Yeah, Blood and Water is actually not really room written. They may have changed that. I'm not really sure, but it's such a small show that it really is just done independently. We would have some phone calls, but at the time that I had joined on to their staff, they had actually already generated a story document. So this was they had a whole story document that set up a lot of the season already. I think they'd had like a writers' summit or something to do that kind of planning. And then of course the network read it 10 months later and then decided everything needed to be different, but that's another story entirely. It was definitely because it's such a serialized show too, it was kind of a tricky way to work. Especially I had middle episodes, which was 4 and 5, which did mean that, everything that came before and then everything came after really had to line up. And, we definitely ran into, some difficulties in really making that work, because certainly a writer's room situation is the more ideal way to do that, is because you're all around each other and you can, there's a lot more interaction. It's just not the same to do it independently. And I even feel like people doing these Zoom rooms now and stuff like that, I feel like that's extra challenging.
It's tough. Yeah.
But it wasn't. We wrote all the scripts in English, though. That I will say. It was. It was a. The translating happens after the scripts are written. That's that didn't really play into how much that worked, except that we would have to make sure that the scripts were at least 50% in either Cantonese or Mandarin, because that was actually a condition of their license. Both being on Omni and also I think how they assembled the funds to put that together. That, and again, that's an ongoing thing. As long as you have enough scenes, then in post, I assume they pulled out the stopwatch and would time it. That's sort of how I understood it was going to work. But yeah, we want to make sure that if there were if there were too many scenes in English, or that we were keeping an eye on that. But it generally didn't affect so much having to think about the language stuff at the source.
So you were writing kind of from essentially a beat sheet. Is that what I'm understanding?
What it was really was a sort of a summary of what would happen in the episode. So we did kind of the traditional steps. So I would have to do an outline where it was like, oh, okay, this happens, and then write a draft from that. Based on the kind of outline, that was sort of what that was something where I could be extrapolating from the summary, like, oh, okay, well, we want to make sure that at the end of the episode, this character is doing this. Then how do we get there based on what was in the previous episode? It was, in a way, it was I don't know how unusual it is in terms of like how set in stone sometimes these things can be, but the characters really went through really dramatic shifts from season to season. We did have like a lot more freedom, I think, than maybe we would have otherwise, because it is a show where they went super dark and they wanted always, we were like amping up the drama and stuff like that. So it kind of was, it did feel like there was a sense of like, throwing stuff out and deciding, oh, this could happen or this could happen. And we pretty much had a lot of, I think, well, Diane, the showrunner, had a lot of say in like, thinking if things could work, because there were definitely some big plot type things that both made it in and both didn't make it in, but we at least had the sort of license to kind of go there.
So Albert, I want to talk to you a little bit about the film festival circuit. Now, it's a tricky thing, and I know that no one necessarily has all the answers, but I want to talk a little bit about getting your second feature into TIFF, which is awesome, and congratulations, by the way, and then transitioning into getting your next feature into a festival like TIFF. So some of the questions that sometimes come up is about how do you make that? Beyond making a good film, what are some tips you think that you could offer for people who are looking at the film festival circuit as an opportunity for their film to generate some interest in their project? And do you feel that having a premiere at TIFF for Inner Place propelled you and pushed your film and your career forward?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I guess there's a couple of questions in there, so I'll try to unpack just in terms of like if you're an independent filmmaker or you have a short film. I mean, I would say most filmmakers before they move on to their features generally try to do the short film circuit in terms of festivals, and I think that's a great proving ground to get some festival experience under your belt. And even with short films, what ends up happening is that you build relationships with those programmers, and a lot of times those programmers end up, by the time you're making your feature, let's say, they've kind of graduated to becoming the feature programmer, and then there's somebody that and you can maybe directly email them and be like, hey, I'm just making this feature, it's my first, it's a little low budget thing, will you take a look at it? And or can I get a waiver, just anything like that, just to kind of get yourself, even if you're manufacturing a little bit of momentum, because obviously sometimes it can feel like, especially if you don't know anybody and you've made this movie and you're submitting it to festivals, you feel like you're just it's a drop in a bucket or something, or not even a bucket, like a giant ocean. And you're like, is anyone going to see this? Like, what is this? You know what I mean? So you might feel a little sort of, you're just throwing it out into the void. But, I think a way to, at least give yourself a little bit of momentum is to, through short films and that kind of thing, if you have made them, to, use those relationships, build on those relationships, and email programmers and all that kind of stuff, which I think is absolutely essential, to being to having some sort of success in the festival world. Not to say that you can't, like with Inner Place, we they did, they had never I'd submitted all these short films and my previous feature, and didn't have any luck with it, but they really responded to that movie. And Inner Place I think is a little bit of an outlier because what ends up happening is that if festival programmers really like a film, they start to talk to each other a little bit. And so there was kind of sort of behind the scenes, there was a lot of festivals kind of vying for the movie, and this is sort of the best case scenario. And I was so I had sort of a problem, but it was sort of like the best problem to have, which was all of these festivals wanted the premiere status of the movie. And so they could start bidding on what they would kind of offer me to get it. I mean, it's like, you're like, oh wow, I've never been able to get any of my movies into a festival, and all of a sudden you have all these top festivals kind of fighting for it. So in that sense, we ended up going with TIFF, but there was, these other summer festivals that were offering this or that. And then, so it was sort of a trial by fire in terms of like, you don't want to make the wrong decision, but at the same time, it's like, well, maybe there is no wrong decision because, this is sort of a great problem to have. But I think we only got to that point because, there was a bunch of festivals, because I didn't have a lot of festival success with all my previous films, a feature and all my shorts. But, I still plugged away, there were still people that I met. There were still people that wrote me back or sent me a nice little note about the films, like, oh, we're not going to take it, but we really liked it, keep at it, whatever. And then you just follow up and you really sort of try to build bridges and keep a thread going. And I think it's essential for any sort of emerging filmmakers to sort of build relationships, whether that's going to, nowadays a lot of festivals like BAF and TIFF and all these other festivals, even in Canada, have a lot of programs for people that are trying to get in or develop a project or make a short film or whatever it may be, or even their first feature. So I think all these programs, it's an incubator for you to create content, obviously, but it's also a way to build relationships and people. And, when you start making connections in that world, you start to realize that, it's sort of it kind of spreads, and people can connect you to other people. And, even now when we're trying to get into a festival or talk to a person in a festival that we have no relationship with, that's generally, 1 or 2 degrees of separation of asking another programmer who worked at that festival a couple years ago, and then they can connect me to somebody that knows, the programmer there or whatever it may be. So I don't know if I answered your question, but but I think it's the festival thing. It is something that it can definitely feel very daunting because there's so many festivals out there, and it feels, to people, especially that don't have any relationships, or maybe they don't live in a big epicenter like Toronto or Vancouver, and they're like, well, how do I get to a festival? But I think we're looking, especially in Canada, we are looking for interesting voices, and I think if you, even wherever you're from, whatever your background is, if you have something interesting to say and you're making content, I think if you put it out there and you kind of do the research on what kind of festivals might be a right fit for the movie or the project that you're making, the people are watching. And, I think that's sort of the way to kind of get your foot in the door. And then from that point on, just kind of build yourself momentum and just keep at it.
I want to touch on that for just one more second. So, there's a lot to unpack there and some great advice there. But something that actually is something that I was told a lot was that if you don't do something with your first feature, that you're gonna put yourself in a big hole as a director. And I actually had mentors tell me that, and I have had. And I don't want to. I'm not that I'm calling anyone out about it, but the great thing about your story is that your first feature, like you said, didn't get into anything and didn't necessarily follow the standard path. But your second feature, was there a big leveling up there in terms of yourself as a filmmaker, or was it? I mean, what was it? And do you feel that first feature needs to be a gold, or otherwise you're gonna be in trouble?
Well, I think there's definitely that advice you've gotten, which is it definitely is good advice, because there are so many sort of programs, competitions, special kind of avenues for the quote unquote first feature. And definitely with my second feature, which did well comparatively to my first feature, which did nothing, it hurt me in the sense that a lot of people assume, because I try to bury that first feature, I was kind of, but obviously it existed, and I wasn't going to pretend it didn't. That a lot of people thought my second feature was my first feature, and when I told them it wasn't, I got disqualified for all sorts of things that I would have gotten into,
Yeah.
And like different competitions that are only open or eligible for first features and all that kind of thing. However, at the same time, I think the interesting thing about filmmaking, and the thing that I love so much about it, is that there is no set path. It's, if you want to be a lawyer or something, you have to go to law school and you have to pass the bar exam. There's certain things you have to do, and there's nothing to say to be a filmmaker or a screenwriter or anything in this arena that if your first feature doesn't land, then you're out of the game. I just don't think that's true. And it absolutely isn't. So yeah, obviously there's advantages and all that kind of thing, but I think if your first feature isn't great, then that's okay. Like if I gave up after my first feature, I don't know what I'd be doing right now. So I think it's good advice, but I don't think it's definitive. And I think for people that take it as definitively, it's sort of an extra burden that you put on yourself that I don't think you need to put on yourself, because making movies is way too hard to just put additional burdens on yourself, So, yeah.
So hard. Yeah, you're right. So hard.
Listen, my first feature is my favorite thing I've ever done, and I think I'm like one of 5 people who thinks it's any good. Like, that's legitimately the response it got when it was out of the world.
Well, films aren't for everyone, and that's the kind of thing that I had to really learn myself, and I still try to learn that as I am in post for my first feature. Going in, and I like the idea in my head that the film that I'm trying to make is a slow burn drama, and that's what I'm trying to do. And slow burn dramas aren't for everyone, and that's okay. And that's something that I've really, even in the editing process, something that I had to think about a lot. And it's like, oh, you know what? It would be better if we went faster cut and did this and this and this, and but that wasn't the movie. And I really had to settle into what my film was and really trust the voice, I think. And who knows how it'll actually turn out. We've got to wait and see for that. But trusting that voice and that first time, it's just, there's a lot of questioning yourself and figuring out what your own voice is, which takes me to my next question for Gorrman. You mentioned being on Altered Carbon as a script coordinator, and being someone that was a junior. Can you tell me a little bit about, did you have a point in your career or something that happened that really took you from being that junior into, the place that you are now, where you're writing and having episodes credited to you?
Yeah, it really is this is hard for a lot of people, especially you know, shyer natured writers. I mean, writers are just sort of, you know, maybe not as outgoing as you know, actors or directors or what have you. But I would say that it's really, for me at least, it was really making relationships, having good relationships, and working your butt off, and showing a good work ethic. And starting off as a screenwriter, or sorry, a script coordinator, it's really showing that you can do the job, because there is, and again, I don't want to get too much into the nitty gritty of the script coordinator position itself, but there are certainly some big technical elements in knowing how to use the screenwriting software and fixing issues with making sure, as I said, everyone's got the same production color. And then there's also a creative aspect to it. You know, when you're lucky enough to be a coordinator that's in the room with the other writers, they do expect you to contribute. They don't want you to just sort of be a silent fly on the wall who's taking up a seat for someone who, another person who also has that sort of technical know-how of software, but is also, you know, got that energy to be creative and contribute. So, you know, it's a hard thing to balance those two things in one position. And, you know, for me, I just sort of made myself available to the writers for anything they needed, and you know, really worked at being good at contributing, even if you did feel like, oh, this idea is kind of stupid, but I'm going to put it out there anyway. And you know, not being shy about, you know, having a dialogue with your bosses, with these showrunners, and saying like, hey, I know we're getting close to the end of production on the season, and you've got a lot on your plate, because as the showrunner, you're also taking everyone's scripts and sort of doing a voice pass, making sure everything's consistent. And you know, sometimes they have a ton on their plate, and something that I found really helpful was also to go to them, you know, sort of at the 11th hour, when they are juggling prep, set visits, and post all at the same time, plus doing a voice pass on all these other scripts, just saying, hey, I know you're super busy right now. Can I, you know, is there any way that I can help? Can I contribute writing a couple scenes? I know that out of that meeting you have to tweak the dialogue in this sequence that's shooting in a couple of days. What if I do a pass for you that you can then take a look at, and, you know, probably throw out most of what I've just done. But, you know, there's something in there that I've written that would inspire them. And so, you know, this is a long sort of roundabout way of saying, you know, be good at your job and be open to putting yourself out there and taking on more if those avenues are available. And then I think, you know, showrunners talk to each other, and producers talk to each other. And in terms of the script coordinating aspect, you know, PMs, production managers, also talk to each other. So if there's a show that's staffing up, you know, in the case of Altered Carbon or Another Life, those shows were written in other places, Altered Carbon in LA and Another Life in Toronto, and they moved those productions here to Vancouver, and they needed a script coordinator who knew the software, the ins and outs of how a production office works as well, and was, you know, hopefully keen enough to contribute, and someone who was had a good vocabulary in the genre, which, you know, I've grown up on Star Wars and Star Trek and all that stuff. So, you know, in those two cases, it wasn't even necessarily the showrunners talking to other showrunners. It was like the PMs or other producers who, you know, had met me or heard of me because of the work ethic I put into on Van Helsing. So yeah, you know, it's really kind of coming down to the networking, which can be a struggle for some writers, but you kind of have to just buck up and put yourself out there.
We're getting close to the end. I just got the warning here that we're going to have to move on to Q&A pretty soon. But before we get there, I had a couple of quick questions that I want to get to. First of all, Gorrman, really quick, can you tell us a little bit about writing right now in the world that we live in? Do you feel like you need to write a certain way, write smaller, write people with write scenes with less people, or like less set pieces? Do you feel that pressure at all? Have you been told that pressure at all? Is there anything that has changed for you as a writer?
Yeah, that's a great question. My contract on Van Helsing season 5 has finished. So as I said, I've moved on to a different project. But they are still in the midst of trying to get going again. They've shot a few episodes already. A script was kicked back to me to see if I could do a quick pass for, a COVID pass. And yeah, it's a reality that we have right now, in that we're going to have to try and find creative ways of reworking fight sequences. Van Helsing is an action heavy show. How are we going to come up with different ways that humans and vampires can fight without having a lot of hand-to-hand, close quarters stuff? Are there creative ways to imply vampire bites without getting an actor literally, burying their face in someone's neck? And then, there's also just writing the number of people in a scene down as much as possible. So, it's definitely something that I think moving forward, I think every show is going to have to kind of address in some way. And, in the genre fair, you can kind of come up with clever ways of explaining it. But, on a more serious, like medical drama, I apologize if it gets a little bit off tangent, but it's like a show pretending that World War II didn't happen, I think, or that 9/11 didn't happen. I think that it's something that will, for better or for worse, will have to be written into the fabric of the stories and the worlds that we're exploring. We can't just pretend that this world-changing event didn't happen.
COVID-19 happened to vampires too.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so I do have a couple more questions, but we're going to jump into actually the Q&A portion. And we have some questions lined up here from audience members. So I'd like to start off with one from Jocelyn Wong. At 310, and it goes to all or any panelists. Have you started to think about how work would change for you when the industry opens up again? And do you anticipate more changes or more opportunities for indie filmmakers because they're used to making films with smaller crews? Does anyone want to take that one?
Well, I can say that, I've had conversations with Telefilm, because, they've committed to saying that, they still have the money that was committed to them, and which means they have to dispense it. Then they're looking for projects to fund. And obviously, the higher budget films, so let's say like the national level movies, they require more moving pieces, and they're harder to put together. They usually have to take it out to the market. So there's a sales agent involved, or maybe you have to cast. It's cast dependent, and maybe you need to cast, some sort of an actor from LA or something like that, which makes it harder. So for them, they definitely did foresee a lot of maybe some of the more regional fund level movies being made, maybe the $1 million, $1.5 million and under films, and funding those kinds of movies, and maybe taking more chances on a filmmaker that maybe has made a Talent to Watch or something like that, or they're looking for their second feature or something like that, which may be able to be put together smaller, so I think if that is the case, and it looks like it is, then obviously once we're sort of a little bit further out of our situation right now, I think the films that are first to go, or probably easier to go, are these kinds of movies, which I think is a great opportunity for emerging, up and coming kind of filmmakers to make their first and second, third, or whatever feature that are just maybe a smaller, more intimate film than, the bigger kind of thing that they have, that they were developing or that they had in mind. So I think in that sense, I think the sort of the emerging filmmakers should start to, do their COVID pass.
I love that word now, COVID pass. I'm going to talk every one of my films now. Did you do the COVID pass? All right. So another question here from Heather Heather Hawthorne Doyle at 246. So this is for Jennifer. Do you have representation and agent manager in the US, and did you in Canada?
I do not have representation in the US, and I actually didn't have representation in Canada for a while. I did have an agent a couple of years ago, or rather that I left a couple of years ago. And is that a couple of years ago now? I can't, timing is a little off, but to be honest, it's fine that I can't remember precisely. But I did not have any kind of representation when I decided that I was going to give the US a try. And now I actually have, just over a few weeks, kind of started working with an agent in Canada. Basically right as lockdown happened, I think. It's when we started having conversations, which was actually worked out in my favor, I suppose, to have somebody who was able and willing to talk to me about that. But I'll be honest, I sort of realized maybe, and honestly, my experience as an actor might have helped with this as well, is like, I never really thought that an agent was going to change my career, or a lot of, as I think Heather probably knows quite well, a lot of the jobs and opportunities and stuff that we get are ones that we generate ourselves. We're out there, we're meeting people, we're, working on other people's stuff, we're giving notes to people, we're having conversations, I really kind of, it was actually kind of, freeing in a way not to have to even think about that for a while. And I decided that I would be quite okay not to have to think about that for a while. To be honest, it's still something I don't even know that much about as a director. I'm hopeful and excited to be working with somebody who actually does seem like they are excited about maybe the things I'm doing, and can maybe talk to the people that I'd like to talk to people that I wouldn't normally have access to. But I think that's really the main thing, is like, it's, the main thing to remember with a relationship like that is that it's a partnership. It's you have to bring as much, if not more, and you probably are bringing more to the table than they are. But what I like about it is that sometimes I can just push a conversation over to somebody else to have. And then they can also be the ones who are, doing the negotiating and stuff, which is that's the big important part to me, is like, they're the ones who are kind of taking care of like the business details and stuff like that.
How about Gorrman or Albert? Either of you repped, and if so or not, what are your thoughts on how does someone know when they're ready to be repped? How do you know that as a filmmaker or writer or whatever? Gorrman?
I am repped locally. My agency is local to Vancouver. Pacific Artists, they're very well connected in Toronto and LA as well. How do you know when you're ready? That's a good question. It's maybe a bit of a cop-out answer, at least in the TV space. It just in that, as soon as you have a writing agreement or a script contract for any writing work that you're going to do, you kind of want someone in your corner who can look at that stuff for you. And for me, it was just sort of asking my fellow writers for recommendations, like, who reps you, and then taking some meetings and finding the right fit. And for me, it was kind of a time crunch, just because like I needed to have someone to look at this thing for me so that I could sign it, so that I could, do that writing. Sorry, that might be a little bit of a cop-out answer as far as when you're ready.
Wow.
But that was my experience with it.
Albert?
Yeah, I have a U.S. agent and a Canadian agent, and personality-wise, sort of, they're very different. but yeah, I've had my Canadian agent for a while, and my U.S. agents are a little bit newer. But I think for the U.S. agent specifically, looking for somebody that was obviously excited about what I was doing, but also understood what I wanted to do, because I think a lot of times the complaints you hear a lot about agents is that, they don't listen to you, or, they won't talk to you if you need to get a hold of them, that kind of stuff. And, for me, it was, with my agents down in the US. Obviously, with Inner Place and Clifton Hill, at least in Canada, I sort of know, I know a lot of the producers in Canada and different filmmakers and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of I can do my own sort of reconnaissance missions if I needed to get a hold of somebody or if I wanted to talk to somebody about a project. But in the US, obviously, I'm a little bit of an unknown entity. So, having my US agent sort of putting me in contact and getting me in the room with lots of people was very advantageous. And with that, knowing that having an expectation of what they could really do, and they're having an expectation of what I'm interested in, and kind of to what Jennifer was saying, it's like you really, if you're hoping your agent's gonna, get you work or something, it's like you have to kind of get the work yourself. They can get you in the door maybe, and then, but you're doing all the lifting, you know what I mean? And then if you can get that job, then they kind of come in to negotiate your deal and look at that kind of stuff. So for me, it's me having, being my own producer and that kind of thing. It's, I love both of my agents, but I don't lean on them that heavily, so I think having that kind of a little bit of that distance a little bit and me not being so needy of them, I think they like me for that and I like them for that as well. But everybody is different. Some people really, really lean very, very heavily on their agents and they sort of use them as sort of a support group sometimes. And there are some agents that are open to that, and some agents that are reluctantly open to that, and some agents that want no part of it, So I think it's finding the right, and there's all sorts of agents, and there's different kind of agencies and different kind of philosophies and mandates and everything else. So it's really, if you're in a position of wanting to know when it's the right time to find an agent, I think, and agents also have an interesting way of finding you when they feel like you're ready as well. So.
This might sound obvious, but if your agent isn't really excited about getting you out there, there's no way any producer or anybody's going to be interested in hiring you. It sounds so obvious, but it's like a lot of people are like, if they have an agent who's not excited about them and then they're, bugging them all the time, or not understanding why things aren't happening. The agent isn't answering their questions with straight answers. That person's not really doing you any favors. They're not helping you. That's maybe a reductive way of putting it, but I just think that's I've learned some lessons over time.
Okay.
Everything Jennifer said, yes.
I didn't.
No, I said everything Jennifer said is absolutely yes. Yeah.
So moving on to the next question, we got one from So Hee Hong at 313. This is for Albert. So when you went to Korea to shoot In Her Place, did you already have your team with you from Canada? Or if not, how was the process of finding trustable cast and crew within Korea?
Yeah, so thinking back on it now, it was a little bit of, insanity, which is that I knew nobody in Korea. I just went there determined that I was going to make a movie. And I speak Korean, but my Korean is definitely my second language. And yeah, it was one of those things where I went there, I found one person to help me, and that person told me about some friends that they knew that may know some other people, and then we just sort of built it out that way. And I ended up, thankfully, I ended up with an amazing crew and these filmmakers and collaborators that are to this day my best friends. And all I think about is going back to Korea to make movies. A lot of it obviously I want to tell Korean stories, but just to be able to work with these people again. So to answer that question, yeah, I didn't know anybody. And yeah, it's one of those things where it all sort of worked out. But if I had to recreate it or do it again today, it probably would blow up in my face. So, what I mean? 'Cause it's one of those things where almost everything had to go kind of my way, Yeah. And for that project, it did, thankfully.
But I love that you literally you went all in and you put everything on the table. You took your money and you went to Korea. I mean, that's so brave. I respect that.
Yeah,
you got to do that, but I respect that.
Well, it was at a time when I was younger, obviously, and I had all these like I had said before. All I wanted to do was make movies since I was 6-7 years old. That's all I cared about, and then I did everything I could to make that a possibility. But up until that point, it was they just didn't work out for me, and I didn't know if it was. Maybe I'm just not a very good filmmaker, I had to face that kind of reality. but I had this story, and I knew that this is the film that I like needed to make. And if I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down with this movie. And that was it. So it would definitely sort of all chips on the table. And I went for it, and thankfully it worked out. But there's definitely a world where it doesn't, absolutely.
Love it. I love that. We have another great question here. It's from Kevin K. Lee. It's at 2:30 p.m. To all filmmakers. Is funding stacked against Asian productions in Canada because many funds, such as CMF, require a broadcast license or exploitation agreement, but no one in Canada is paying for Asian films and Asian TV shows?
That's kind of a complicated question, because I actually do kind of think it's more about greater implications of the industry than specifically funding. Like I will say that I think, and maybe Albert can speak to this more specifically, but I have found over time, it does feel like there are more films that are incorporating like different cultural perspectives in addition to the Canadian ones. I think that whatever sort of understanding it used to be that like Telefilm will only fund, beavers and maple syrup and Mountie stuff, like, which was, again, reductive way of putting it, but that's, I think, how a lot of people felt about it. I think those perspectives have shifted quite a bit. I know they're not all the way there, but it's such a bigger conversation. I just don't think it's something that they can necessarily ignore. And we're specific to the CMF. This is something I don't know that much about, and I don't know how much they want me necessarily talking about all this, but Blood and Water is funded by a specific, I think it's CMF oriented thing about multilingual productions. So the reason that show is able to be made is because they have made a commitment to have 51% second language other than English in that production. That's something I would maybe look into, even just going forward, as far as if you're interested in making a multilingual production or something that involves other cultures. But I just think that's, I think it's, again, we could have a really big conversation about, what our industry has lacked in terms of cultural diversity and all kinds of diversity and underrepresented groups and stuff like that. But specific to that question, I think there's a lot more movement on that front. And it is going to take, though, greater cultural shifts in order to really have an inclusive industry. So anyway.
Anyone else want to add something to that?
I mean, I think that Jennifer summed it up very well. But I will add that, that cultural conversation, at least in my experience, is happening more and more. I think that to achieve a greater equality, I think it's just about having more of these the higher up decision makers to be people of diverse backgrounds. And again, just speaking from my experience, like I'm still pretty mid-level, but the door hasn't been closed to me because of my background. I think in many ways, on top of working hard and etc., I think in some ways diversity's kind of helped me. Everyone is looking to add new voices to writers' rooms or to productions or what have you, and that's certainly been a positive for me and for young actors and performers that I've also seen get cast in these projects that I've been lucky enough to be a part of. So I think that conversation is happening, from my experience anyhow. Yeah,
I mean, I can give you sort of two practical examples of this, which is, for myself personally, the funding for Clifton Hill, a big portion of it was from the CBC, but it was a very specific program from the CBC, which was the Breaking Barriers Fund, which was a fund specifically for people of color or actually female filmmakers as well, that were making their second feature or third feature. So it wasn't available for your first feature, but if your first feature at least had done something or gotten into certain festivals, there was some sort of criteria, then there was a substantial amount of money that they were willing to give to the production. So I had access to that funding, which sort of allowed the funding to come together for Clifton Hill. And so definitely there are programs, as Gorrman was saying, that are kind of allowing diversity to kind of have a seat at the table a little bit, or at least a little bit more of an even playing field, because we are so obviously so far behind the eight ball in terms of just in the history of, media. But also, I'm part of a lot of juries, and, even the Talent to Watch here for your film, Arnold, which was with All in Madonna. I was looking at all these applications, and we made it a point to look for voices, because these are obviously emerging new filmmakers that hadn't made features before, and just giving diverse voices a chance. And I think that was and that was something that I wasn't trying to push forward. I think everybody in the room, like all the jury members, it was very much one of the top priorities. So I think there is a push for sure. And I think as filmmakers, people like Jennifer Gorrman or myself, as we move along in our career, we're given opportunities to kind of, allow more diverse voices or people from Asian backgrounds or whatever background to have a seat at the table. I think it's really, really incumbent upon us to give those kinds of opportunities, which I really believe in. So I think it obviously takes time. Rome wasn't built in a day, all that stuff. And but I think it's partly on us, but also just on people to start to kind of push harder.
Awesome. We're running out of time, but we have time for one more question. And this question comes from Jared Yu. And that was at 316. Can you tell us, what is some technical and spiritual or emotional advice you'd give to younger filmmakers taking the first few steps into pursuing the film industry more seriously? This is open to anyone.
I mean, I'll just jump in right off the top. It is a challenging industry just in terms of just keeping your motivation and focus and all those things. It's really, really tough. And I think if anything, I maybe have this sort of extreme pragmatic view of things, which is that have a day job, have a way that you're making money. I still do, or I did until that office shut down. But it's allowed me to do a lot of things just because I was working. I produced a feature film that was one that I didn't direct, that we shot during the week, shot on weekends, and then I was working during the week. I think, if you can take care of yourself that way, it also helps from, if you happen to have parental pressures, like it helps from that standpoint too, that if you're taking care of yourself and nobody has to worry about you in that respect, then it gives you a lot more freedom just to think about creative stuff. It gives you the freedom around the times that you're, having to focus on other things, to go like, what do I want to write? What do I want to, direct? What do I, those types of things. So I think that's maybe, the one piece of advice I can impart. The one thing I would also say that's just like a hot tip for making stuff is that if you shoot at the end of the year, you might be able to get really good people to work on your stuff for not as much as they normally would. The 3 major long form productions that I've worked on were all shot in December. So people, casts had finished on their big shows, crew had finished on their big shows. It's nobody wants to be out in the cold except film people who, if they have the opportunity to get something done before Christmas season, then they might be up for it. So that's anyway, that's my advice.
That's great. Anything, Gorrman?
Yeah, as I said before, I would say try and develop a thick skin to rejections, whether that's festivals or jobs, or as I said, in the room and someone's just your idea didn't quite land. You have to. It's about resiliency. You just have to pick yourself up and try it again. And another thing that might help you with that is to find like-minded people. Whether that's going to, say, film school or writing school, or that's just finding a cohort of people who want to read your stuff and give you feedback. There's writers groups online on Facebook. Ink Drinks is one. And they do in-person meets in Toronto and Vancouver as well. You find your cohort. Maybe you'll make a short together. Maybe one person will land a job in a writer's room and kind of be that first person in the room and try and wedge that door open for like-minded colleagues to follow. That would be my advice. Yeah.
Great. Albert.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to. I mean, everything that Jennifer and Gorrman said, absolutely, and I think just to sort of double down on everything that you guys were saying is that, I think it's a lot of it is, whether being pragmatic like Jennifer or just sort of, being pragmatic like Gorrman as well. But I think it is about just doing the work, which is, whether that's just making films with your friends and finding a little community wherever you may be, and just kind of putting in the time and doing it. I think it has to come from the love of wanting to create and make things. I think that is very, you can feel the authenticity of that. It doesn't matter if it's not the most polished thing or whatever. And as you build more contacts, you get more confident in your craft, and as you grow, I think you will start to develop a voice, and you'll start to develop where you want to be and what you want to do. Whether that's, I have a lot of filmmaking friends that then transitioned into being cinematographers or editors, and and they all started off wanting to be directors. So I think it's all about just putting yourself in a position that if this is something that you want to do and you love it, then just, especially in this day and age, you can sort of do it. And it's amazing how once you start dipping your toes into it, you start to meet like-minded people, and you just can get on that train, and hopefully, you look back and you realize you've actually traveled, quite a distance. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but I look back, 5 years ago and 10 years ago, it's like, wow. Sometimes I feel like I'm stagnant all the time and nothing's happening. But then I look back, it's like, you know what? I've actually, from where I was to where I am now, it's like it's an amazing journey. And sometimes it doesn't feel that way. But if you just put your head down and do it for the love of it, I think you'll find that it's quite rewarding.
Awesome. Big journey from you. And you just directed David Cronenberg. That must be crazy.
Yeah, I did.
Cronenberg, oh my God. I would have sold my pants so many times.
Yeah, he was the first. He was the first thing I shot on the first day on this movie.
I would have cried myself to sleep for sure.
Yeah.
So we're running out of time, but just maybe 15 seconds to everyone. Where can we find your next project? When can we see your next project? Starting with Gorrman.
Thanks. My work on The Order Season 2 will be premiering, I think, sometime this summer. 10 episodes dropping all at once on Netflix, so check it out.
Awesome.
Nice.
Jennifer?
You can always find me on Twitter. I'm at Average Jen with 2 N's. Grandma Dearest will hopefully be done at some point. I think I misspoke and I said that I produced all my own work. I didn't produce Grandma Dearest. I didn't produce Blood and Water. I worked with amazing, amazing, amazing producers on those. So I just wanted to be clear about that.
Okay, so we're going to check out Grandma Dearest for sure. And Albert?
Yeah, I guess Disappearance at Clifton Hill just opened, or just went out on VOD in Canada, I think last week. So people can watch it in all those different VOD platforms that people do, iTunes or Google Play and all that stuff. So, go check that out. I guess that's the first thing on my list of things to kind of promote out there.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you so much to all three of you. That was so informative. I had such a good time. All three of you offered so much. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, you.
Arnold.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.
All right. If you enjoyed that, and if you did, please feel free to share that with all your friends. Tweet, Instagram us at VAF Vancouver, hashtag VAF, VAFF, hashtag DIF 2020. We're entirely organized and produced by a group of dedicated volunteers. So if you liked it, please consider making a donation as well to vaf.org. Again, like Lynn said, please check out Eliminate Hate campaign, asking filmmakers and the public to make their own 60-second public service announcement. If you want to do that, please submit it at eliminatehate.org. That's eliminate, the number 8, hate.org. And check out hashtag Eliminate Hate for updates. Please check out also, we have another awesome panel coming up next week, Saturday, May 23rd at 2020 at 2 p.m. The topic, animation and post-production. I think that's going to be really cool. The panel will discuss what it's like to be an artist behind the scenes in comparison to live action cinema and television. It's going to be moderated by Joshua Lam, production coordinator at Bardell and MAM creative producer. And we'll have 3 amazing guests, Andy Poon, Vincent Tong, and Jenny Kong. Also, a quick thank you to our MAM and DIF producers, Lynn, Regina, Mayumi, Natch, Joshua, and all the amazing volunteers, for making this all happen. They do so much behind the scenes. You do not know how hard they work. All volunteers, they really put it out there. So thank you to all of them. And also, finally, we'd like to thank all the healthcare professionals, first responders, and essential workers out there who are doing so much. And we're so grateful for that. Thank you for tuning in this afternoon, and I hope to see you next Saturday.